The morning I learned my husband had emptied the account we had spent 7 years building, the husband of the woman he was sleeping with showed up outside my office carrying a banker's box and said something I would remember for the rest of my life. "Your husband didn't just steal from you," he told me. "He used your name to help steal from me. I have every invoice, every transfer, and every message they thought was gone. If you want your life back, don't warn them that we know." 48 hours earlier, I had still thought my biggest problem was whether my husband, Derek, and I could survive another year of pretending our marriage was fine. I was 28, working as a purchasing coordinator for a children's hospital in Nashville, and I had become the person everyone called when a contract did not match an invoice or a vendor charged for something that never arrived. At work, I checked details because mistakes cost money. At home, I had made the stupidly human decision not to treat my husband like a vendor who needed auditing. Derek had spent the previous 6 months telling me his real estate business was slow, that interest rates were hurting commissions, that he was stressed, that he needed room to breathe. I believed him because he was my husband, not because the facts supported him. That distinction would become painfully important. On Tuesday morning, before leaving for work, I opened our savings account to move $4,000 into a 6-month certificate. My father had died when I was 19 and left me a small duplex on the east side of Nashville. I rented one unit, kept the other available for my mother when she visited, and treated every dollar of rent like it belonged to my future, not my lifestyle. Over the years, Derek and I had added bonuses, tax refunds, and extra income to the same savings account. The balance should have been a little over $96,000. It was $312.17. I stared at the screen long enough for the numbers to stop looking like numbers. Then I opened the transaction history. There were 3 outgoing wires, each sent during the previous 10 days, all to an LLC I had never heard of, Monroe House Collective. I downloaded every statement before doing anything else. Then I checked our joint checking account. Another $18,600 was gone. I checked my credit report and saw an inquiry from a regional bank dated 11 days earlier. I had not applied for anything. That was the moment fear stopped being an emotion and became a checklist. I changed my personal passwords, froze my credit, downloaded copies of our mortgage and insurance records, and called the bank's fraud department. I was still on hold when Derek walked into the kitchen wearing a pale blue suit and the expression of a man who had already rehearsed what he planned to say. He looked at my laptop, then at me, and for half a second I saw annoyance rather than surprise. "You found it," he said. I remember how calm his voice was. That calmness hurt more than yelling would have. "Found what?" I asked. "The money you transferred to Monroe House Collective, or the credit inquiry I didn't authorize?" His face tightened. He set his keys on the counter and told me not to make this ugly. Then he said Monroe House was a new staging and design company he was launching with someone named Sloane Mercer, that our savings had been sitting uselessly, and that the money was safer in a business with growth potential. I asked why he needed to hide it from me. He said because I would have said no. I asked who Sloane was. He looked straight at me and said, "She's the reason I'm done pretending this marriage works. There are sentences that split your life into before and after." That was mine. Derek told me Sloane understood ambition. She understood the world he wanted. She was creative, connected, exciting. Then, as if infidelity and theft were not enough for one conversation, he said he had already spoken with an attorney and wanted me to stay somewhere else for a while because he and Sloane needed room to get the new company off the ground. I laughed once, not because anything was funny, but because my brain rejected the absurdity of being evicted from my own life by the man who had just emptied my account. "I'm not leaving my house because you decided my money belongs to your girlfriend," I told my husband. Derek's expression changed. He reached into his briefcase, placed a photocopy of a loan document on the island, and said, "Then you should probably read that." The document showed a $420,000 business line secured partly by the duplex my father had left me. My name appeared beside an electronic signature. I had never signed it. "That property is mine," I said. "It was inherited before we married." Derek shrugged. "You signed the guarantee." "No, I didn't. He smiled in a way I had never seen before, a thin smile with no affection left in it. Good luck proving that. Then my husband told me I was always so certain I was the smartest person in the room, and maybe this would teach me that real business moved faster than hospital paperwork. He left before I could answer. I did not chase him. I called a lawyer. By noon, I was sitting across from an attorney named Melissa Grant, handing her printed bank records, screenshots, my credit report, the loan copy Derek had left behind, and proof that I had been physically inside the hospital purchasing department during the exact hour the electronic guarantee had supposedly been signed from a residential IP address. Melissa listened without interrupting, then told me two things that probably saved me from making the kind of emotional mistake Derek was expecting. First, I did not need to abandon my home or surrender any property just because my husband said so. Second, I needed to stop communicating with him about money except in writing. She made calls to the bank and title company while I sat there. By mid-afternoon, a fraud hold had been placed on further draws connected to the disputed credit line, and notice of the disputed signature had been formally submitted. Nothing was magically reversed. No detective arrived with handcuffs. Real life was slower than that. But for the first time that day, something was moving in the correct direction. I went back to work because sitting alone at home would have destroyed me. At 5:30, my supervisor walked into my office and said there was a man in the lobby asking for me. "He says it's about your husband," she said. My stomach dropped. The man waiting downstairs looked exhausted rather than dangerous. He was tall, broad-shouldered, maybe 36, wearing work boots beneath an expensive wool coat. He introduced himself as Caleb Mercer. The last name hit me immediately. "Sloane's husband?" I asked. He nodded. For another few weeks, legally. He did not try to shake my hand. He simply asked whether we could speak somewhere private. We went to a coffee shop across the street, chose the back table, and that was where he set the banker's box beside his chair and told me Derek and Sloane had been doing far more than having an affair. Caleb owned a regional architectural millwork and commercial interiors company started by his grandfather. Sloane had worked there as brand director until 4 months earlier. She still had relationships with vendors, knew their billing system, and had access to old templates. Caleb had discovered irregular purchase orders charging high-end furniture, custom cabinetry, lighting fixtures, and imported stone to renovation projects that did not exist. At first, he thought an employee was stealing. Then he traced delivery instructions to a storage facility leased by Monroe House Collective. The company was registered to Sloane and Derek. Caleb opened the box. Inside were copies of invoices, delivery logs, purchase orders, screenshots, and bank records supplied by his company's fraud counsel. The total exposure was already over $510,000. I felt cold all over. "Why would they need my duplex?" I asked. Caleb slid another page toward me. Monroe House had used the business line Derek opened to pay deposits, warehouse rent, marketing expenses, and luxury showroom construction. The stolen goods from Caleb's company were being used as inventory and display pieces. My savings had become startup capital. My inherited property had become collateral. His company had become an unwilling supplier. The same LLC connected everything without anybody needing to invent a legal trick. "My attorney has already contacted the bank and law enforcement," Caleb said. "I came to you because your name appears on the guarantee. If that signature is fake, you're another victim, not part of their company." I showed him the fraud notice on my phone. He stared at it for a moment, then gave a tired half-laugh. "Good. You moved faster than I expected." I told him details were my job. Then I corrected myself. No. Trusting my husband was my blind spot. I'm done confusing trust with permission to ignore facts. Caleb looked at me differently after that, less like another injured spouse and more like someone who might actually be useful. He told me he had confronted neither Sloane nor Derek. His attorney had advised him to preserve evidence and stay quiet while investigators worked. "They think I'm clueless," he said. "Sloane thinks I spend all day arguing about lumber costs and payroll. Derek thinks I'm some boring contractor she outgrew." "What are they planning?" I asked. Caleb opened one last folder. Marlowe House Collective was holding a grand opening in 3 weeks inside a newly renovated design showroom in the Gulch. They had invited real estate brokers, developers, local media, investors, and half of Derek's family. The showroom itself was full of merchandise purchased through the fraudulent orders. "They're going to display the evidence under champagne lights," Caleb said. I should have felt satisfaction. Instead, I felt something darker and quieter. My husband had not made one desperate mistake. He had built an entire future out of money that belonged to other people and had expected me to finance my own replacement. I closed the folder and asked Caleb what he needed from me. "Nothing reckless," he said. "Keep every message. Let your lawyer handle the property. Don't tip them off. And if Derek sends you anything about the company, save it." I nodded. Then I asked what he wanted. Not legally, personally. Caleb looked through the window at traffic moving past the hospital and said, "I want to see whether Sloane still thinks I'm boring when somebody starts reading those invoices out loud." For the first time in 48 hours, I smiled. The next 3 weeks were the hardest quiet weeks of my life. Derek mistook silence for surrender almost immediately. Once my attorney informed his attorney that I was disputing the loan and would not vacate the house, my husband stopped trying to bully me face to face and switched to text messages that somehow managed to be both smug and incriminating. He wrote that I should stop fighting the inevitable. He said the duplex was already tied to the company now, and that if I cooperated, he might make sure I received something later. Melissa told me to answer only what was necessary. I did. Meanwhile, I moved my direct deposit to an individual account, removed Derek as an authorized user from anything legally mine, updated insurance contacts, and created 2 encrypted backups of every financial record. I did not announce any of it. At work, I behaved normally. At night, I barely slept. My mother wanted me to come stay with her outside Knoxville, but I refused to leave my home because Derek wanted me gone. He stopped sleeping there after the first week anyway. Sloane posted enough social media content for me to know exactly where he was. Photos began appearing of the Marlowe House showroom. Ivory sofas, walnut cabinetry, sculptural lights, hand-cut stone tables, champagne walls, and a private office with Derek's initials embossed on the door. Sloane posed beside him in almost every picture. Her captions talked about building from nothing and betting on ourselves when other people lacked vision. I never commented. I took screenshots and sent them to Melissa. Caleb's company counsel did the same because several products in those photographs matched serial numbers from the disputed orders. That was the strange part. Derek and Sloane were not hiding once they believed they had succeeded. They were documenting everything. My mother-in-law, Denise, made the situation worse. She had never liked that I earned more consistently than her son. During our marriage, she called me practical in a tone that meant dull, and praised Derek for being a dreamer, even when his dreams required someone else to cover the mortgage. 10 days before the showroom opening, Denise came to my house with Derek's younger sister, Paige. They did knock, because Melissa had already sent formal notice that nobody had permission to enter without me. Denise stood on the porch holding a garment bag that belonged to Derek and looked offended that I made her wait outside. "You're really going to turn this into a war?" my mother-in-law asked. "Derek is trying to build something important." "With my savings?" I asked. "With a business loan carrying a signature I didn't write?" Denise's jaw tightened. She said marriages were complicated. I said forgery was less complicated. Paige looked at the floor. Denise told me Sloane believed in Derek in a way I never had, and that maybe if I had supported his ambition, he would not have needed to find someone who did. I almost snapped. Instead, I remembered every lesson I had learned in the previous weeks. People revealed more when they thought you were emotional and powerless. "Did you know he used my duplex?" I asked. Denise's eyes flickered. It lasted less than a second, but I saw it. "Derek said you agreed to help," she replied. "He said the property was basically wasted sitting there. Did you sign anything?" Paige suddenly looked at her mother. Denise said, too quickly, "No." Then she handed me the garment bag and left. I wrote down the conversation the minute I closed the door. 2 days later, Caleb called. His attorney had learned that Derek's parents had invested $75,000 into Marlowe House after the fraudulent credit line was approved. The money itself was legitimate, but the investment explained Denise's desperation. Her son's fantasy was no longer just an affair she was defending. Her retirement money was inside it. "Do you think she knew about the fake signature?" Caleb asked. "I don't know," I said. "And I'm not going to invent an answer because I'm angry. That mattered to me. I wanted consequences for what people actually did, not punishment because I hated them." Caleb went quiet, then said, "That's probably why you're going to come out of this better than they do." Our conversations became more frequent after that. We spoke about documents at first, then about ordinary things because betrayal becomes exhausting when it is the only subject in your life. I learned Caleb had married Sloane when he was 28, after she had worked at his company for 2 years. He had spent most of his 30s expanding the business and quietly reinvesting profits while she became increasingly embarrassed that he drove an old truck and refused to move into a gated neighborhood. She mistook restraint for lack of success. The irony was that Caleb was comfortable, not secretly worth hundreds of millions, not some disguised tycoon. He owned a healthy company, a warehouse, 2 commercial buildings, and less debt than Derek probably had on his car. What made him powerful was not hidden wealth, it was that Sloane had stolen from someone who understood exactly what had been taken. One evening, Caleb sent me a photo of a custom oak reception desk inside the Marlowe showroom. "Recognize it?" he asked. I did not. He replied, "Neither will Derek when they roll it out as evidence. That desk belongs to a hotel project in Louisville." I laughed despite myself. Then he sent another message. "Sloane invited me to the grand opening." A minute later, my phone buzzed with an email from Denise. I had been invited too. The message beneath the digital invitation read, "I think seeing Derek happy might finally help you let go." I forwarded it to Melissa and called Caleb. "Looks like we both have plans Friday night," I said. By the time Friday arrived, the investigation was no longer a secret shared by 2 betrayed spouses and a pair of attorneys. The bank's internal fraud team had verified that the electronic signature on my guarantee had been submitted from an IP address associated with the storage facility leased by Marlowe House, not from any device I had ever used. The e-sign platform showed that the verification code had been sent to a prepaid number opened under a false account. The lender had frozen the unused portion of the credit line. Caleb's company had completed its inventory reconciliation and documented more than $500,000 in diverted materials and furnishings. Investigators had interviewed employees without telling Derek or Sloane the full scope of what they were examining. Nothing about the process was dramatic. Most of it happened through emails, conference calls, and people in plain shirts comparing numbers in quiet offices. That reality made me trust it more. Melissa warned me that the case could take months and that no outcome was guaranteed. "Do not walk into that showroom expecting a movie ending," she said. "Go because you were invited. Keep your distance and leave if anything feels unsafe." I promised. I chose a black jumpsuit I already owned, pinned my hair back, and drove myself. No diamonds, no limousine, no transformation into some fantasy version of myself. I wanted Derek to see the same woman he had underestimated, only standing straighter. Caleb met me across the street. He wore a charcoal suit and the expression of someone entering a meeting he had prepared for too long. "You okay?" he asked. "No," I said, "but I'm going in anyway." The Marlowe House showroom was packed. Derek and Sloane had turned stolen inventory into theater. A jazz trio played near the entrance. Servers carried bourbon cocktails and miniature crab cakes. White flowers climbed 20-foot columns. A local lifestyle photographer moved through the room taking pictures. At the center stood Derek in a cream dinner jacket, holding court with 3 developers and grinning like a man who believed the universe had finally recognized his importance. Sloane wore a silver dress and stood beside him with one hand on his arm. When Derek saw me, his smile vanished. Then he noticed Caleb, and something like confusion crossed his face. Sloane saw her husband a second later. She did not look guilty. She looked irritated. She walked straight toward us. "Why are you here?" she asked Caleb. He took the invitation from his pocket. "You invited me." "I invited you so we could talk privately after tonight," she said. Not so you could bring her. I almost admired the entitlement. Derek joined us and told me I had no business showing up to sabotage his launch. Your mother invited me, I said. Denise, who had been approaching from behind him, froze. I thought she should see that you're doing well, my mother-in-law said defensively. I thought it might give her closure. That was generous, Caleb said. Denise gave him a blank look. She had met him once at a dinner, but clearly had not considered him important enough to remember. Sloane whispered his name with warning in her voice. Caleb ignored her and looked around the room. Beautiful place, he said, especially the millwork. Derek's confidence returned. We source internationally. No, Caleb said. You don't. The change in Sloane was immediate. Her face went pale. Derek laughed because he still did not understand. Caleb pointed toward the oak reception desk. That was fabricated in my shop for a hotel project in Louisville. The credenza behind you was ordered for a medical office in Lexington. Those walnut panels were billed to a condo tower in Franklin that never placed the order. Should I keep going? The nearest conversations began to stop. Sloane grabbed Caleb's arm and hissed, Not here. He looked down at her hand until she released him. Derek turned to me. What did you do? I almost answered with anger. Instead, I said the truth. I checked what had my name on it. He stepped closer and lowered his voice. You have no idea what you're messing with. Actually, I do, I told my husband. That's the difference now. Then the front doors opened, and not with sirens or shouting. 4 people entered with 2 uniformed officers behind them. One was the investigator who had interviewed me 3 days earlier. Another carried a document folder. The room became quiet because people sense authority before they understand it. The investigator asked for Derek and Sloane by full name. Derek said they were in the middle of a private event. The investigator told him they had warrants related to suspected bank fraud, identity theft, and theft involving Marlowe House Collective, and requested that both of them step away from their phones. Sloane stopped breathing for a second. Derek looked at me as though I had somehow summoned the police with spite. This is a marital dispute, he said. No, the investigator replied. It isn't. Employees from Caleb's company who had accompanied the investigators began identifying disputed items. Another officer directed guests away from the rear office. The glamorous showroom changed meaning in real time. Furniture became evidence. Display invoices became records. The life Derek had built to prove he was smarter than everyone else became a catalog of decisions he could no longer explain. Denise began crying before anyone touched her son. Paige pulled her mother aside. Sloane turned on Derek first. You said the guarantee was valid, she whispered. You said she signed it. Derek snapped that she knew exactly how the account had been opened. Their voices rose. Caleb and I did not say anything. There was nothing left to add. An investigator asked Derek to come with him. When my husband realized he was actually leaving the room under police supervision, he looked directly at me. The arrogance was gone. Hannah, tell them I didn't steal from you, he said. Tell them you knew about the business. For 7 years, I had protected Derek from embarrassment, corrected his mistakes quietly, made excuses when commissions were late, and convinced myself loyalty meant carrying whatever he dropped. I could have humiliated him then. I could have shouted. Instead, I said, I already told them the truth. That was all. He stared at me for a few seconds, then turned away. The months afterward were less cinematic and more satisfying. Derek was not sentenced the next morning. Sloane did not lose everything before breakfast. My savings did not magically reappear because justice had entered the room. There were interviews, filings, motions, bank reviews, insurance claims, forensic accounting, and weeks when nothing seemed to happen. Melissa had prepared me for that, and I was grateful. The disputed guarantee against my duplex was eventually voided after the bank concluded that my authorization had been falsified. My property remained mine. The bank recovered a portion of the money remaining in Marlowe House accounts, and civil settlements plus restitution proceedings eventually returned most of what Derek had taken from our savings. Caleb's company recovered a significant amount of inventory from the showroom and storage facility before it could be sold. Some items were damaged, Some were gone, and some losses were covered through insurance while the criminal case continued. Derek and Sloane both faced charges tied to fraudulent loan documents and diverted business property. 10 months after the showroom opening, Derek accepted a plea agreement that included prison time, restitution, and financial penalties. Sloane entered a separate agreement and received a lesser sentence after cooperating with investigators. I did not attend either hearing. I had stopped needing to watch them lose in order to believe I had survived. Denise and Paige never faced criminal charges. There was not enough evidence that they had known the signature was forged, and I was glad investigators cared about proof more than my anger. Derek's parents did lose the $75,000 they voluntarily invested in Monroe House when the company collapsed. Denise blamed me for months. She sent one long email saying I could have solved everything privately and that Derek's future had been destroyed over money that could have been replaced. I read it once, forwarded it to Melissa, and never answered. My divorce became final 11 months after the morning. I found $312.17 in our savings account. I celebrated by taking my mother to dinner at a small Italian restaurant where nobody knew my name. She raised her glass and asked whether I felt free. I thought about it before answering. "I feel expensive," I said. She laughed. "What does that mean?" "It means I finally understand what my peace costs, and I'm not giving discounts anymore." At work, I received a promotion into vendor compliance because the same habits that helped me survive the fraud turned out to be useful in a larger role. I bought nothing flashy. I rebuilt my emergency fund, put the duplex into a properly structured estate plan, and opened an account no romantic partner would ever touch simply because love was not a reason to eliminate boundaries. Trust, I learned, should make honesty easier, not safeguards unnecessary. A little more than a year after the grand opening, Caleb called me on a Thursday evening and asked whether I wanted to see something. By then, his divorce had been final for months. We had stayed in contact through the cases, then gradually through ordinary life. We were friends first because neither of us trusted anything that arrived too quickly. I drove to one of his commercial buildings near Germantown and found him standing inside a renovated storefront with exposed brick walls and afternoon light spilling across the floor. "What is this?" I asked. He handed me a coffee and said one of his tenants had moved into a larger space, so he was turning the storefront into a small materials library where young designers could see locally manufactured products instead of relying on expensive imports. Along one wall were samples of wood, stone, metal, hardware, and finishes. In the center sat a familiar oak reception desk. I stared at it. "You kept that?" He smiled. Evidence release finally came through. I figured it deserved a less criminal second career. I ran my hand across the edge and laughed. That desk had once stood beneath the Monroe House logo while my husband toasted a future purchased with stolen money. Now it was just wood again. Beautiful, useful, stripped of the meaning arrogant people had tried to give it. Caleb leaned against the counter and asked, "Can I take you to dinner?" I looked at him. "We've had dinner. We've had case meetings with food. We've had coffee. We've had witness preparation coffee. You're very specific. I learned from you." He smiled, then his expression softened. "I mean a date, Hannah. One date. No schemes, no attorneys, no discussing either of our exes unless absolutely necessary." A year earlier, I might have been terrified that saying yes meant I had failed to learn anything. Instead, I understood the lesson more clearly now. Protecting myself did not require never trusting again. It required trusting slowly, with open eyes, and never surrendering responsibility for my own life. "Dinner," I said. "One date." Caleb nodded. "I'll take the win." We left the storefront together and walked toward a restaurant 2 blocks away. There was no black car waiting, no secret fortune, no courthouse contract, no promise that another person could rescue me. That was what made it better. My husband had thought taking my money would make me powerless. My mother-in-law had thought replacing me would make me disappear. Sloane had thought stealing someone else's future was the same thing as building her own. They were all wrong for the same reason. They believed ownership came from taking. I had learned it came from knowing exactly what was mine and refusing to hand it away. My name, my work, my home, my money, my choices, my future. And when Caleb held the restaurant door open and waited for me to walk through first, I realized the best revenge had never been watching my husband get escorted out of a showroom built on lies. It was this. He had tried to empty my life, and somehow, after everything, I had filled it with things he could never touch again.